They said the chair was never empty. Not once. Not even after the fire. Not even after the bodies were counted. Not even after the town erased the house from every map. Because some nights, when the wind moves just right through the pine trees, you can still hear silverware gently tapping against porcelain, as if someone is still being served. In the winter of 1847, in a small, nearly forgotten settlement in western Virginia, there stood a plantation known only as Halewood Estate. It didn't appear in tax records after 1852. It wasn't listed in church archives, and no surviving census ever confirmed how many people truly lived or disappeared there. But one detail remained, repeated in every surviving account. Every dinner, every night, at precisely the same time, a slave sat at the master's table, not as a servant, not standing, not waiting, sitting, eating, watching. No one could explain why. Visitors who stayed even a single night reported the same strange ritual. A long dining table, 7 chairs, 6 occupied by the Halewood family, and the 7th, reserved, prepared, expected. But here is where the accounts begin to fracture. Some say the slave never spoke. Others insist he spoke only when spoken to. A few, only a few, claim something far worse, that the man at the table was not always the same person. By 1853, Halewood Estate was gone, burned to the ground under circumstances never officially recorded. The family vanished. The staff never relocated. And the land itself was quietly absorbed into state territory, as if it had never existed. But one document survived, hidden inside a church ledger 40 miles away. A single sentence, written in trembling ink. The seat was not given. It was taken long before the house was built. And that was where the real story began. The Halewood family did not arrive like settlers. They arrived like something already established, already rooted, already expected. In 1821, records show that Elias Halewood purchased over 600 acres of land without negotiation, paid in full, in cash. No origin of wealth listed, no prior residence confirmed. But what unsettled local officials wasn't the purchase. It was what followed. Within a year, Halewood Estate was fully constructed. Too quickly, too precisely, too complete. 7 bedrooms, a dining hall larger than most churches, and beneath it, something no blueprint ever explained. Workers who helped build the estate refused to speak about what they saw underground. 3 of them left the region entirely. One was later found wandering barefoot on a road in Kentucky, repeating the same phrase over and over. There were already footsteps before we dug. The Halewoods themselves kept to strict routines. They attended church, donated generously, hosted gatherings, but no one was ever invited to stay past sunset. Except once. In 1834, a traveling minister named Samuel Kearns documented his overnight stay. His journal would later become one of the only surviving first-hand accounts of Halewood Estate. At first, his writing was calm, observational, respectful, until the second night. His tone changes. The handwriting becomes uneven, pressed harder into the page. The family dines at an hour that does not match the clock. The air grows still before they sit. No insects, no wind, no sound beyond the house itself. Then he describes the table, the arrangement, the 7th chair. I asked about the man seated among them. I assumed he was kin. No one answered, not even him. But he looked at me, as if I had asked the wrong question. The next entry was written in a different tone entirely, almost frightened. He did not blink, not once. I watched for several minutes. The others avoided looking at him directly, even the master. And then, the final line before the journal abruptly ends. Tonight, they asked me to sit closer. They said there was room. Samuel Kearns was never seen again. Every place with secrets has rules. Unwritten, unspoken, understood without being taught. At Halewood Estate, there was only one rule that truly mattered. Never ask about the man at the table. Servants learned this quickly. Those who didn't stay long enough to repeat the mistake. One account comes from a woman named Lydia Cross, who worked at the estate for less than 3 weeks. Her testimony was recorded years later, though large portions were removed before being archived. What remains is incomplete, but enough survived. She described her first dinner service in detail. The silence, the arrangement, the unnatural stillness in the room. No one spoke unless spoken to, even the children, even the master's wife. It was like waiting for something. Then she describes him. He was already seated when we entered. I didn't see him come in. I didn't see anyone pull out his chair. He was just there. She noticed something else. Something small, but deeply wrong. His plate was always full, but I never saw him take food from the table. That night, Lydia made a mistake. A small one. An innocent one. She asked another servant, "Who is he?" The reaction was immediate. The other servant dropped a tray, not by accident, as if something in the question itself had weight. "Don't say that again," she whispered. "Not in this house." But it was too late. Lydia felt it before she saw it. A shift, a pressure, like the air had suddenly become aware of her. Slowly, she turned her head toward the table. He was already looking at her. Not angry, not curious, just certain, like he knew I would ask. That night, Lydia did not sleep. She said she could hear footsteps outside her door. Measured, even, back and forth. But no one was there. In the morning, she was told something quietly. Something that never appeared in official records. "You were noticed." She left the estate that same day. She never returned. And for the rest of her life, she refused to sit at a dining table with 7 chairs. By the late 1840s, rumors about Halewood Estate had begun to spread beyond the region. Not openly, not publicly, but quietly. Among those who listened for things that didn't quite belong, there were whispers of something beneath the house. Not a cellar, not a storage space. Something older. One map, never verified, showed a crude outline beneath the estate. A shape that didn't match the house above it. Circular, deliberate, and always centered directly beneath the dining hall. A former groundskeeper, whose name was removed from all official documents, described it in fragments during an interview years later. It wasn't built by them. You could tell. The walls were wrong. Too smooth in some places, too worn in others. He claimed there was a staircase. Hidden, not locked, but never used. Except on certain nights. When asked what happened on those nights, his response was simple. The chair was already filled before dinner began. But sometimes, he said, it wasn't. And those were the nights the family didn't eat at all. Instead, they waited, in silence, at the table, for something to arrive. He described hearing sounds from below. Not voices, not movement. Something slower, like something remembering how to walk. By 1851, nearby towns had stopped sending workers to the estate. Deliveries were left at the edge of the property. No one stayed after sunset. And still, every night, the table was set. 7 plates, 7 chairs. And always, someone sat in the 7th, even when no one saw them enter. For the first time in recorded memory, the chair was empty. It happened on a night no one could later agree on. Some said it was early spring of 1851. Others insisted it was deep winter. But every account agrees on one thing. Something was wrong before anyone entered the room. The air inside Halewood Estate felt unfinished, like something had been interrupted. Dinner was prepared as usual. 7 plates, 7 glasses, 7 chairs. But when the family entered the dining hall, the 7th chair remained untouched. No one spoke. No one questioned it. Because for the first time, there was nothing there. The servants later described that silence as heavier than any presence. It wasn't relief, one account reads. It was waiting without knowing what for. The master of the house, Elias Halewood, did something he had never done before. He did not sit. Instead, he stood at the head of the table, watching the empty chair as if it were still occupied. Minutes passed. No movement, no sound. And then, from somewhere deep beneath the floor, a single knock. Not loud, not violent, but deliberate. Every person in that room heard it, because every head turned at the exact same moment. Then another knock. Slower, closer. One of the servants dropped to her knees, covering her ears. Another began quietly crying. But the family remained still, waiting. The third knock didn't come. Instead, there were footsteps. Not above, not outside. Below, moving. No official record confirms what existed beneath Halewood Estate. But fragments remain. Stories told too quietly to be written down. Details that survived only because someone was too afraid to forget them. There was a door, hidden beneath the dining hall. Not locked, not sealed, just avoided. That night, for reasons no one could explain later, Elias Halewood opened it. The servants begged him not to. One account claims his own wife tried to stop him. But he didn't hesitate. It's late, he reportedly said. And it has not come. The staircase beneath the house was narrow, steep, carved from something older than the estate itself. Not wood, not stone, something smoother, worn down by time or use. The lantern light didn't reach far. It didn't spread the way it should. The darkness didn't move back, one account said. It stayed where it was, like it had weight. As Elias descended, the sounds changed. The house above him faded, replaced by something else. A rhythm, not footsteps, not breathing, something slower, like something learning the timing of a body. Halfway down, he stopped, because he realized something no one had prepared him for. The footsteps weren't ahead of him. They were behind. Remembered, by the time Elias returned, he wasn't alone. No one saw what followed him up the stairs. Not clearly, not directly, but every account agrees on one thing. Something came back with him. The servants described the temperature dropping. Not gradually, instantly. The candles along the dining table flickered, then steadied, as if reacting to a presence they recognized. Elias walked back into the room slowly, deliberately, and then he sat, not at the head of the table, at the seventh chair. No one moved. No one spoke, because something about him was wrong. He sat too still, one servant later said, like he had forgotten how people sit. His hands rested flat on the table. His eyes didn't settle on anything. They moved, but not naturally, like he was seeing things in the room that weren't there. Then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. You waited. 2 words. Flat. Even. No emotion. His wife stood up immediately. Elias, she whispered. But he didn't respond. Instead, slowly, he turned his head toward her and smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, just incorrectly. It remembers the table, he said. No one understood what that meant. Not yet, but they would. By 1853, Halewood estate burned. The fire was seen from miles away. Bright, sudden, uncontrolled. But when authorities arrived, they found something that didn't match the destruction. The dining hall was untouched. Everything else reduced to ash. Walls collapsed, rooms erased. But at the center of it all, the table remained. 7 chairs, still standing, and arranged perfectly. No bodies were recovered. Not from the house, not from the grounds. No remains, no bones, no evidence that anyone had ever lived there. Except for one detail, carved into the surface of the table itself. 7 markings, not names, not symbols, just impressions, as if something had pressed down repeatedly, over time, into the wood. And in the 7th place, the marking was deeper, wider, as if something had sat there, longer than anything else. The land was cleared soon after, the records sealed, the name Halewood erased. But the story didn't end, because years later, in places far from Virginia, in homes with no connection to the estate, people began reporting something familiar. A table, 7 chairs, and 1 seat. That was never empty. By 1861, the war had begun, and with it chaos. Records burned, families displaced, entire towns erased or rebuilt. It should have buried the story of Halewood Estate. But instead, something else happened. The pattern reappeared, not in Virginia, not even in the same region, but across states. In Ohio, a family reported setting an extra place at dinner without remembering why. In Pennsylvania, a boarding house owner claimed one of his guests never arrived, but was seen every night at the table. In Louisiana, a widow insisted her dining room had 1 chair too many, yet could not bring herself to remove it. None of these people knew Halewood. None had ever heard the name. And yet, the structure was always the same. 7 seats. One of them wrong. We didn't invite him, one account reads. But it would feel worse if we didn't set his place. That was the first real shift. At Halewood, the presence was contained. Now, it was being repeated, copied, like something had learned the pattern and was teaching it. The first institution to recognize the pattern was not the government. It was the church. In 1873, a small seminary in Maryland began documenting unusual confessions. Not crimes, not sins, habits. People describing routines they didn't remember starting. We set an extra plate. We leave a chair open. We wait before we eat. At first, the priests dismissed it. Grief rituals, psychological coping. But then the descriptions became too specific, too consistent. One priest, Father Alton Reeves, began collecting these accounts privately. He noticed something others didn't. The number never changed. 7. Always 7. And when he asked why, the answers were always the same. Because it would notice if we didn't. That was the first time the word appeared. Notice. Not anger. Not punishment. Awareness. By the late 1800s, the pattern had evolved. It no longer required a specific house or a specific family, only a structure, a table, 7 seats, a routine. Some families reported inheriting it. My mother did it. Her mother too. No one ever explained why. Others had no history of it at all. We bought the house, and the table came with it. It just felt wrong to remove a chair. The most disturbing accounts came from those who tried to stop. One man in Illinois wrote, "We set only 6 places that night. Nothing happened at first. But halfway through dinner, my wife asked who we forgot, and none of us could answer." Another account ends abruptly. "We removed the chair entirely, burned it, thought that would be the end of it. The next morning, there were 7 again. No explanation, no sound, no evidence of how. Just correction. There were cases, rare ones, where someone chose to sit in the 7th chair. Not by accident, not out of confusion, deliberately." These stories almost never ended well. In 1891, a man named Thomas Edric documented his experience in a personal journal. He had heard the stories, didn't believe them. "A chair is a chair," he wrote, "and I will prove it." That night, he sat in the 7th place. At first, nothing happened. Dinner continued. Conversation flowed. But then, something shifted. "I felt out of step," he wrote, "like I was slightly ahead of everything, or behind it." The sounds in the room dulled. Voices stretched. Movement slowed. And then, everyone stopped speaking at the same time. They turned toward him. Not suddenly. Not violently. Slowly. As if following a signal. I realized then, I had taken something that was not empty. His final entry reads, "It is easier now. Sitting here. I understand why it does not leave." Thomas Edric was never seen again. But his family continued setting 7 places. Every night. By the early 1900s, the pattern had spread too far to ignore. But still, no official record acknowledged it. Because it didn't behave like a threat. It didn't attack. Didn't destroy. Didn't demand. It simply integrated. Quietly. Families who followed the pattern reported something unusual. A sense of familiarity. "It feels like we've always done this." Even when they hadn't. Even when they could prove they hadn't. Photographs would show 7 chairs. In homes that only owned 6. Journals would reference routines that no one remembered writing. And sometimes, people would recall conversations with someone they couldn't describe. "He was there," one woman said. "I know he was. I just can't remember his face." That was the final piece. It wasn't just appearing. It was being remembered. In 1912, a locked archive room inside a Maryland seminary was opened for the first time in decades. Inside, among water-damaged ledgers and sealed confessions, there was a folder with no label, just a symbol on the front, 7 small vertical marks, and one longer line beneath them. The document inside was unsigned, undated, but it referenced something no one outside a handful of witnesses had ever written down. Halewood Estate. It wasn't described as a house or a plantation. It was described as a site. The structure built upon it is irrelevant. The document reads, "The pattern predates the construction." That was the first confirmation. Whatever happened at Halewood did not begin with the Halewood family. They didn't create it. They found it. The document goes further. Long before the estate was built, the land was already marked. Not officially, not on maps, but in older records. Older than the town. Older than the state itself. It had been avoided. Travel routes bent around it. Settlements stopped short of it. And those who crossed it did not stay. One translated passage from an early survey journal reads, "There is a place where the ground feels used, but not by us." Another account describes hearing movement beneath the soil. Not animals, not water, something slower, as if the earth remembers wait. By the time Elias Halewood purchased the land, it had already been empty for generations. Not abandoned, avoided. The most disturbing part of the document was not about the house. It was about what came before it. There are indications of a structure predating the estate. It states, circular, centered, not aligned with the later construction. A structure beneath the ground, not a basement, not a foundation, something else. At its center, there were markings, 7 positions, arranged around a central space, not carved like symbols, not drawn like diagrams, pressed, repeatedly, over time. The pattern suggests use, not ceremony, not worship. Then a line that was later scratched out, but still readable beneath the ink. Arrangement for presents. No one could fully interpret what that meant. But one detail stood out. There was no mention of people, only positions. The document ends with a theory, not confirmed, not proven, but repeated enough times to become difficult to ignore. The Halewood family didn't create the ritual. They completed it by building the house directly over the structure. They enclosed something that had never been enclosed before, contained it, defined it, gave it boundaries, and most importantly, they gave it a place at the table. The act of seating was not symbolic, the document reads. It was recognition. That changed everything. Because before that, whatever existed beneath the ground had no form, no position, no role. But once the chair was set, once the place was acknowledged, it learned. After the fire, after the estate disappeared, after the land was cleared, they thought it was over. But the document ends with a warning. Not dramatic, not emotional, just certain. The structure is no longer required. The pattern persists without location. The seat, once established, does not disappear. And then, the final line. It does not need to return. It only needs to be remembered. Because that's the truth no one wanted to write down. It was never about the house. It was never about the family. And it was never about the man in the chair. It was about the act itself. The space. The invitation. The quiet, repeated decision. To leave room for something you do not understand. And once that space exists, it doesn't stay empty. There is no record of when it ended. Because it didn't. By the mid-1900s, the pattern no longer needed land. No longer needed inheritance. No longer needed memory passed down through generations. It only needed one thing. A place. Homes changed. Cities grew. Families moved. But the structure stayed the same. Tables. Chairs. Routines. And slowly, without being taught, without being told, people kept leaving space. Sometimes it was intentional. A seat for a late guest. A plate for someone who might arrive. Sometimes it wasn't. An extra chair that no one remembered buying. A place setting added without thinking. And sometimes, it was something even quieter. A feeling that removing a chair would be a mistake. There is a detail that appears in modern accounts. Small, easy to dismiss, but always there. People begin to feel counted, not watched, not followed, counted, like something is aware of how many of us are here. One account reads, this feeling doesn't come all at once. It builds. At dinner tables, in quiet rooms, during moments where nothing should feel wrong. And then, a thought appears. Soft, reasonable. There should be one more. No voice, no sound, just certainty. Most people don't notice it. They adjust. Without realizing they've adjusted. They add a chair, shift the table, make space, and life continues. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing obvious. Because that was never the point. But in the rare cases, where someone resists, where someone refuses to leave that space, things begin to feel uneven. Meals feel shorter. Rooms feel tighter. Sleep becomes difficult. Not because something appears, but because something doesn't. It felt like waiting for a sound that never came. One person described. And eventually, most people give in. Not out of fear, but because the absence feels worse. If it happened to you, you wouldn't notice. That's what every account confirms. There is no moment of realization. No sudden understanding. Just small adjustments. You'd move a chair slightly. You'd set an extra plate. You'd pause before eating. And none of it would feel strange. Because it wouldn't feel new. It would feel familiar. Like remembering something you never learned. There was never a man. Not in the way people try to understand it. The descriptions changed because it was never fixed. Never stable. It appeared as something that fit the space it was given. At Halewood, it sat like a man. Later, it didn't need to. Because the shape was no longer important. Only the position. Only the presence. Only the fact that something was included. No document explains why the number never changes. 7 chairs. 7 places. But one theory appears more than once. 6 is a group. 7 is a pattern. The moment the 7th place exists, something shifts. The table is no longer just a table. It becomes something structured, something complete, something recognized. This is what separates it from everything else. It doesn't take people. Not really. It doesn't chase, doesn't hunt, doesn't force. It waits. And when the space is made, it fills it, quietly, completely. There is one detail that appears in the earliest account, and the most recent ones. A detail so small most people ignore it. The sound. Soft. Almost unnoticeable. Utensils against a plate. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just present. As if someone is eating. Even when no one is. There is still one rule. It hasn't changed since Halewood. No matter where the pattern appears. No matter how modern the setting. No matter how normal everything seems. The rule remains. Do not ask who the extra place is for. Because every account that includes that question ends the same way. Not with an answer, but with silence. A silence that feels acknowledged. Right now, wherever you are, there is a place nearby where people sit to eat. A table. A set of chairs. And if you think about it carefully, you might notice something small. Something you never paid attention to before. A chair that feels slightly out of place. A space that feels necessary, even if you don't know why. And once you notice it, it becomes very difficult to ignore. Because the story was never about Halewood. It was never about history. It was never about something far away. It was about something simple. Something quiet. Something that doesn't need to be invited. Only allowed.